Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
We all saw the big news in 2018 when the world's leading scientists had assembled a report that basically said, if we want to limit global warming, then we have to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And why do we have to do that? Well, basically to avoid devastating social and economic consequences, right? So even if you don't care about the planet, they're saying from an economic standpoint, we're going to be in big trouble if we don't reach net zero emissions by 2050. Now, regardless of where you come down on the whole climate change debate, right? Is it a real problem? Is it not? I think factually we know now it is a real problem. The question is more about what do we do about it, right? Do we abandon fossil fuels? Do we find ways to make them cleaner? What should be done? And in order to decide what should be done on that larger issue, one that Lance and I have covered here over the years, we have to first understand what is the real cost of fossil fuels? Because I think most of us, right, we're familiar with gas prices and we think, well, that obviously has the cost of the fuel built in and then is marked up so that gas stations can make some money, right? That's how it works. Not really. Not exactly. And in fact, the International Monetary Fund, which periodically assesses global subsidies on a variety of different areas, is working on a recent paper from 2019, and it shows that the fossil fuel industry got a whopping $5.2 trillion with a T, $5.2 trillion in subsidies in 2017 alone. That's 6.4% of the total global gross domestic product. Huge subsidies. So what do fossil fuels cost us from an economic standpoint? Well, we're going to answer that and more on today's show. But of course, we couldn't begin a conversation on the climate and the global economy without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, the point I think we need to make early on is that there's a cost to anything we do, correct? I mean, it doesn't matter if I get out and walk around my field. There's a cost. There's a good cost. My weight drops, my blood pressure goes down, and my doctor's happy and my wife's happy with me. If I get in my car and drive into town, then there's a cost to that too. As far as how much gasoline did I use? How much oil did I burn? How many emissions went up into the air? How am I ruining the environment for future generations? So any way you look at it, whether you believe in the global warming or not, there is cost involved in every action that we take as humans on this planet. So, no matter how dire you think the circumstances are, hopefully we can all agree that there is cost to that. And so that's what we're going to take a look at today. And just keep in mind, we're not saying one way or the other so much. I mean, Justin might later on, but we're trying to get you to realize, good or bad, there is a cost to the actions that we take or the actions that we don't take. There will be a cost in the future to those things.
We're referencing an article from Vox today. It's available at thestateofus.org. And I think this part here kind of lays it out for us, Lance, right? Quote, getting to do something for free that adds a cost to society does confer an advantage, but it's debatable whether that should be called a subsidy. And that debate is important. How we sort the factors that drive the ongoing consumption of fossil fuels positions our options to avoid them. The politics is similar across the board for curbing emissions, but the policy tools change depending on whether you view greenhouse gas emissions as a tragedy of the commons or an unfair market advantage. So I think what they're laying out here for us, Lance, right, is there's kind of two different ways to look at this. There is the side of discussing climate change, right, for the sake of climate change, or there's the side of discussing it from the market advantage from a capitalistic standpoint. And that's part of why I think this is such an interesting conversation, because I think part of what the article hopes to contend for us, Lance, right, is that setting it up this way is actually hurting the free market, because some things like renewable energy might have already started to kill off more of fossil fuels if fossil fuels weren't necessarily subsidized the way they are. And that's where this murkiness comes into play of, when we talk about, well, what's the cost of wind energy or what's the cost of solar? And we stack that up against, what's the cost of oil, right? Well, really, it's not an apples to apples comparison, not because the energy types are different, but because there's almost no subsidies, right, for the cost of renewable energy, where, as we discussed before, in 1 year alone, in a single year, there were $5.2 trillion of subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. So again, you're not, and that's part of where I think this is what we try to do, Lance, right, is reframe it for people to think about. You're not looking at an apples to apples comparison, even if you think that you are.
Right. And that side of it is very true. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. But as I was talking to you earlier off air, when you do this, okay, well, let's just make it fair. Okay. I mean, let's make it, like you said, we have cost if we do things. You were talking about, to me, that if you are a business and you have trash, you have to pay for your trash to be hauled away, right? And different things. And you have to, if you live out here in the country, like you're paying a sewer bill, but I have to take care of my septic tank, and there's a cost involved. And that's all true. And right now, the fossil fuel industry is not having to pay the entire cost. So therefore, we as consumers get it cheaper. So it looks like to us that it's more beneficial for us to go ahead and continue to drive our cars and our trucks and our SUVs and to heat with these fossil fuels than it is to put solar panels on our house or buy an electric car or promote wind energy in our area. But that's not true. From that standpoint, like you said, with the government giving kickbacks or whatever you want to call, what word you want to use, to the fossil fuels, it's not a level playing field, and it makes us use those fossil fuels when we might use those other fuels if we factored in the true cost of the fossil fuel.
Well, and that's kind of where, as the article goes on, Lance, it explains all these other things, right, that go into, because when we think of the waste product of fossil fuels, I think we all have that image that comes to our mind, right, of this smokestack somewhere burning and you see these pollutants flying into the air, right? I mean, that's what, or we think of our tailpipe on our car, right? And the emissions coming out there. Those are the sorts of things that come to mind. But one of the things that the article points out is it's not just that, right? Transporting coal spreads dust. Pumping oil can spill, as we've all seen, and natural gas can explode. Obviously, also when burned, these fuels emit air pollutants like particles and nitrogen oxides in addition to greenhouse gases. But as they go on to explain, one of the biggest costs has very little to do with the material itself. It has to do with the security of the material, right? For example, the U.S. military spends at least $81 billion a year protecting oil supplies. And that's primarily shipping lanes, right, for those oil supplies. And so who pays for that 81 billion, right? Well, we do. So even though these companies aren't paying for it, somebody pays for it, right? And that's the whole point of the government right now through subsidies, and then therefore the taxpayers, right? We are all paying for it, but the companies aren't the ones paying for it. And of course, what the article calls the social cost, right? The cost that isn't a dollar value right now, but failing to do something about it now causes economic repercussions in the future. Like, again, the wildfires or more tsunamis or more hurricanes or what have you, adverse weather conditions, all kinds of things that are going to, if A, then B, then C sort of thing.
And the people in control and in power, the fossil fuel industry, they don't want things to change because this is how, and kudos to them because we wouldn't be as advanced as a society without them. But now has their time come and gone? Is it time to do everything else? And I think it's just, what's really important is we need to have a level playing field. And if fossil fuels are still cheaper. And after, leveling everything out and taking away these extra costs, then it's going to be tough in the market to talk about solar and wind and some of these other things. But what the numbers show us is that if it was a level playing field and fair, then more of us would probably be looking into wind and solar because our fossil fuels would not be as cheap as they are to us. Now, that would raise, and this is what we want to get into more, or I guess I want to get into more in the second segment, and that is, what is the cost to society, to the cost of living, the cost to society as far as cleaner air? I don't see smog when I'm driving into work every day if I'm going to work in the city, all the cleaner air and pollutions. That all makes sense, and I can see that. But what's the cost out of my pocket? We're saying, okay, you're paying taxes and you're doing this and you're subsidizing these big oil companies through what the government is giving them credit for. But the other side of it is, if gasoline and these fossil fuels, my heating oil, if they all go, if we're going to say it's a equal playing field, how much does that affect me in other costs of my life? And that's the point I want to bring up, just to be fair, and don't come down and say, oh, the old guy's, he wants his car, but he wants his big old truck and driving it. No, I'm all for a level playing field, but you need to understand what's this going to cost. It's like I used to give an example when we talk about migrant farm workers in my history class, and kids would say, well, that's not fair. They should be paid. And I said, well, are you willing to pay $20 for a salad when you sit down at McDonald's and order it? Because if you give workers more money, it's going to raise the cost of the products that you buy. If we're going to level the playing field on the fossil fuels and then all of a sudden we all start paying the same amount for gasoline as we do for wind or solar or electric, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that, but it is going to raise prices in other markets.
And that's exactly what we have to look at coming up, because to Lance's point, it's easy to say that we want to do these things. Part of the reason they haven't been done isn't just lobbying efforts, folks. It's because figuring out the transition isn't simple. Most transitions will adversely harm those that have the least. And that's what we have to look at. How do we go about that in a way where we can do it and it's equitable, where you're not unfairly harming consumers? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Today's episode is sponsored by Olas. These days, we all need a vacation. But even if you can't get away to a beach, you can take a swig of Olas.
Olas mouthwash is the dentist-formulated, better-tasting mouth rinse, and it comes in a flask. Olas's marine bioactive complex contains natural ingredients like CoQ10, echinacea, and magnesium. A swig from delicious Olas can be your morning escape, your oasis in a bottle. And unlike the big brands, Olas mouthwash gives you fresh breath without the alcohol.
Olas mouthwash. This flask is better without alcohol. Visit olaswellness.com. That's OLAS wellness.com and use promo code SHOW at checkout to get 20% off your first order. That's olaswellness.com, promo code SHOW.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
$5 trillion. It's a lot of money, Lance. $5 trillion. I've never seen $5 trillion. I know you've probably got that stashed in your mattress.
I don't want to tell anybody where it is, but I've got a little bit. I've got close to that around here somewhere.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. And if you forget, that's probably not great. But hopefully somebody knows where it is, right? So
I wrote it down somewhere, but I probably can't find the paper.
Or you can't find the paper that you wrote it down on to know where it is. Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think, what we're looking at today, right, is this idea that fossil fuels, the real price of them, we're not familiar with, because none of us have ever paid the real cost of fossil fuels, right? We've never paid that. And the article points out that one of the main sections, direct subsidies for fossil fuels serve a purpose, but they're inefficient at that purpose. when we talk about subsidies, we're talking about reducing the retail price of a commodity. That could be things like milk, eggs, coal, or oil, right? Those are all things. And actually, for what it's worth, all of those things are subsidized. And that's why do you pay what you pay for milk? Why do you pay what you pay for eggs? Well, that's because the government has lowered that cost before it makes it to that retail shelf. You might not know this, but Lance and I have talked about it a number of times before. Many grocery stores sell milk or eggs at a loss. They lose money selling those, but they do it. Why? Because they know that people have to come to buy them. And that's why they stick them at the back of the store, right? Because they're not looking to make it convenient for you. They don't want you to pop in and grab your eggs, milk, whatever, and run out. They want you to have to go through the store and buy other stuff that they can actually make money on. Same reason, right? If you've ever gone through a drive-through or to a gas station, you're always like, man, why is the milk or the eggs so expensive here, right? That's not even close to what I pay at the grocery store. Well, it's because they're actually trying to make money on it. Right? That's the difference, is they're actually trying to turn at least a little bit of net income out of that product. And I think that's a big story behind helping us understand what's happening here with renewables. And that's where we left off at the end of the last segment, right, Lance? And this concern that subsidies are obviously very inefficient and they're not equitable approaches to achieving what your objective is. And that's according to a gentleman who's quoted in the article here. He goes on to explain, it's not to say that removing these subsidies will not impact heavily on the poor. It will. And so what we argue is that you really need to strengthen social protection systems. So this is where, Lance, we get into that. One of the issues that people have a problem with, right, is if we're going to make this transition, we're going to have to spend money to make sure that people, for example, can still afford their fuel oil to heat their home.
Right. And not only that, but can they afford their groceries?
Exactly.
Because like you said, it costs the farmers or the grocery store companies or the canners or the meatpacking industry.
Everybody.
It costs them money to ship those products to your local store. And so if they're paying more for the fuel that powers their trucks, then it's going to cost you more when you walk into the grocery store to buy all those products that you mentioned. Or if you have a delivery service, all of a sudden it's going to cost more for those deliveries to be made. Well, if they still want to offer you free delivery, which we've seen during this pandemic, a lot of companies are doing, offering you free delivery to get you to buy their products. Well, the price of the products go up. And they're going to have to, because they can't, if they have to pay more for their delivery system, then it's going to make them have to make their money somewhere. And so you're going to see the cost of living go up in other places. But then why do this? Well, because maybe if that cost goes up, then maybe these companies will look at electric vehicles. Maybe we will get technology with one of my favorite things, the drones, who can deliver things, or these robot type machines that they're testing in major cities that can deliver, like automatically pulled wagons that deliver things, can be programmed and deliver things in downtown areas with sidewalks and streets and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's technology beyond my understanding, but if all of a sudden we were paying more for all these everyday items, we might be interested in supporting those different ideas that people are still trying anyway, because it would not only help the planet, but it would save us money. And the bottom line is, if you want to get people behind a movement, save them money. And then that's when all of a sudden they take interest. But we're not interested as a nation right now, or as a world, in doing this, because things are being subsidized. Things are being made cheaper for us. And so therefore we don't see a need to change. So for us to get that feeling that we need to change, we've got to be hit in the pocketbook. But if you do that, as they point out, that hits the poor people even harder than they're being hit already. Because if you don't have very much and prices go up, so now how do you have that policy discussion to take care of people while you're letting the market sort itself out?
And that's where we get into, you get people interested either by doing one of two things, Lance, right? Saving them money, or paying them money. And that's where we go into the next part of this, is the concept of, and some of you probably heard of this, right? A carbon tax and dividend. So in other words, we're going to level the playing field, right? We're going to tell fossil fuel companies, and the terminology they use, by the way, is carbon polluters. Okay. Because this isn't just let's tax oil and natural gas. It's let's tax anybody who's putting the waste product of those things into the atmosphere. So yes, you're going to tax the natural gas companies, but you're also going to put a tax on things like gasoline for your car, right? Because when Lance drives his big old honking truck over to Speedway and fills it up, he is contributing to carbon pollution. Now, did the oil company that produced it also contribute? Yes, they did. But Lance himself made a conscious decision, purchased something, and then created a waste product, which he put into the air, which he didn't pay any fee to do, right? Same thing again, going back to that whole, you don't have free trash service at your house, right? You pay for that. You pay for your sewer or your septic system, right? I mean, these are things that we always have paid for to get rid of waste, right? And this is the same thing. It's a waste that we don't see generally. So it's a little more of a challenge for us to understand that it's there. But it is. And so things like a carbon tax and dividend say, just like you pay for this other stuff, right? Everybody, whether you're a consumer all the way up through the companies, everybody's going to start paying for that. The difference is the dividend scheme redistributes the money that's raised from those companies to low income households, or some other proposals are you just distribute it to everybody proportionally based on number of people in household, right? So in other words, why does this work? Because now it just sounds like, well, but we're just taxing them and then giving the money back, right? Yes. But like Lance said, by taxing them, you're encouraging them to find other ways, right, around that tax. Because if I use an electric vehicle, then generally speaking, I'm not going to pay that tax. Now, the company that produces the electricity is going to have to pay that tax, and that's going to incentivize them to do what? To switch over to something like solar, right? Because now they're not paying the tax and you're not paying the tax, right? So everybody's winning. And everybody that's still using the old stuff still has to pay the tax, and everybody that everybody that's in, for example, a state is going to get a redistribution of that money back to them, to allow them to afford the higher cost of those products while you're making the change. And I know that's did that make sense, Lance, the way that I explained that? Because I just want to make sure people
it is.
get
I just got an example for everybody before you say, well, we can't do that here in the United States. I mean, that's not the way we operate. We'll just go to the great state of Alaska. For many years now, the people of Alaska, you get money every year for living and breathing in Alaska from the oil companies, because that was the deal that the oil companies made with the government of Alaska and the Alaskan citizens to build the pipelines and to pump out the oil and everything else. So we have a semblance of this going on in our country already, where you talk about, yes, you do this with the fees, and then you can redistribute it to the people. And so before you put up and say, well, we can't do that here, they might do that in other countries, or that's just going to raise my taxes, so I'm not going to do that. Because, again, there's the cost, right? And I know we've got some people way, on the fringes out there who say, well, yeah, they do this kind of stuff in Europe all the time. Right. But they pay 60% in income tax, and their other taxes are higher. And here in the United States, while that's a different show, we don't want that. But we have an example in Alaska where they're charging money, like you said, and then redistributing it to people. And again, I don't know why people don't want a fair market. It's like, because then there are other things. I mean, I talked about prices that would go up on goods, but there are other things that would be cheaper, like you said. And that was your example with the competition. Your electric car, all of a sudden you're not paying for it. I'm paying for it when I go to the gas station and pump gas, but you're not paying for it. But then people would say, like you said, I thought it was a great example, well, the electric company is going to have to pay because they're generating electricity with fossil fuels. Okay. But your response is, yeah, then they build a solar, they get some solar panels, or they build some windmills and they generate their electricity that way. Then they're not. So it just encourages good behaviors all around when you have a free market like that.
Right.
Yes, the initial costs are higher. There's a way to take care of it. We already do that in some states in the United States. And it encourages everybody to find a cheaper way to get things done.
And that brings us to that next point of how would things look differently? And is this the only thing we need to do, right? If we just tax carbon, then everything will be better, right? Well, no. Unfortunately, that's not the end of the story, right? It's an important first step, but how do we get from here to carbon neutral by 2050? Well, it's a challenging road, and we first have to understand how things would already look different if we'd started this, because it starts to make a big impact pretty quickly. To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
If fuel prices had been set at a fully efficient level in 2015, estimated global CO2 emissions would have been 28% lower. Fossil fuel air pollution deaths, 46% lower. Tax revenues higher by 3.8% of global GDP, and net economic benefits, which is environmental benefits less economic costs, would have amounted to 1.7% of global GDP. So everything looks better, right? Yes. Even without new technologies, even without new innovation, just simply pricing fossil fuels according to the harm that they cause society, right? The cost of disposing of them makes a big difference, but it doesn't work all on its own. It doesn't fix the problem because you still are able to use these things, and it takes time, right? I mean, even if the Lance Jackson Electricity Company wants to go from burning coal, right, to using solar panels, he can't just snap his fingers and overnight that's going to happen. It's going to take time. So even if he's committed to it and wants it to happen and is ready to do it as fast as possible may still be several years, before you can do that. And for big companies that have, thousands or hundreds of these facilities, it's going to take even more time, because it is a big outlay. So the question becomes, how did we get to subsidizing these things in the first place? And that's where I think it's important people know, Lance, right? A lot of this subsidization occurred not because people loved fossil fuels, but because it was really the only viable option at the time, right? We started subsidizing milk, eggs, etc., to make them more affordable. Did the same thing with fossil fuels. Renewable energy the market's already bringing that price down. Imagine what would happen if we took a similar approach that we've taken to some other stuff like fossil fuels, like milk, like eggs, right? Things might start to look pretty different then.
They weren't something that people wanted. I mean, farmers used to get mad and burn this stuff off because it ruined their crops. This isn't the bashing on fossil fuels. It's just that this is the way business is done in order to encourage something. But why is it going on now? We don't need, it's not necessary anymore. Or the other way of thinking of this, and I was thinking of this as you were talking, Justin, that is, what's the cost of us continuing to do this? And we talk about the rising sea levels and the hurricanes. Those of you in the southern part of the United States, the hurricane season that you've are enduring right now, which goes on till the end of November. All of that brings cost, right? All of that costs us. And when FEMA or the government goes in and fixes that, not that they shouldn't, that's wonderful, but who pays for that? Well, that's the taxpayer dollars. Our taxes pay for that, or we don't pay for it and the debt goes up, which again is another issue about the economy, but it all is tied in together. We're not even talking about air pollution. And well, what about the health costs? If the air is dirtier that you're breathing, how many people are going to develop lung issues? And then there's a cost to medicine. You just can't say, well, it's too expensive to change now, we'll do it later. Because every day that we wait, and here's the bottom line, whether, you want to agree or think about it or not, to me, I understand it might be more expensive now for some of us, but it's going to be cheaper to take care of the problem now than it is to take care of the problem later. And the sooner you step in, while it might inconvenience you in the here and now, it's going to be easier to deal with it in the here and now than it will be to deal with it in the future. So I've found that true. It doesn't matter whether it's in a personal relationship, an economic relationship, whatever it is, whether it's taking care of my house, well, I don't want to put new gutters up. Okay. Well, then it's going to ruin your foundation. Why not deal with it in the here and now rather than putting it off and paying even more for it down the road?
Well, and at some point, we don't have the option to deal with it anymore, right? I mean, we arrive at a point where we pass that point of being able to do anything that's adequate to stop it. So it's not just a matter of cost, right? It's also a matter of there's a window of opportunity where you can do it, right? It's kind of, well, it's like Lance's gutter and house situation, right? There's a window of time where you haven't fully destroyed part of your house and you could still fix it and, get out of it for much cheaper. Or there's a point where now you're going to fix the gutter, but the foundation's already ruined, right? So, and that's very much what we're in here. We may get to a point where we say, oh, gee, this is real bad. We got to stop it. And we stop it. But that doesn't mean that all the negative effects just cease at that moment. We still did years and years and years of damage. And that doesn't just get undone all at once just because we suddenly woke up and decided to do it. And I think to Lance's point, the majority of people listening to this episode will live to continue to see negative impacts as a result of climate change, whether that's from a simple economic standpoint, whether that's from a health standpoint, whatever it might be. And that's why we have to deploy resources now, time and energy, right, to take the problem seriously and do something about it. Because the good news is, if you're one of those people out there that listens with that skepticism, right, about clean energy, for all those people that want new American jobs, that is one of the big answers to new American jobs. Manufacturing, and installation, right, and maintenance of all of these new energy systems. Those are excellent opportunities for millions of Americans to get jobs that will last long into the future, not jobs that have an end date on them. Because I think we've talked about this a number of times, Lance, right? No matter how you slice it, even if, let's just say climate change is a complete hoax, right? The fossil fuel industry's future is a limited future. It's the nature of the business they're in. The commodities will run out. Now, will they run out tomorrow? No. Will they run out 50 years from now? We don't know. And that's part of why, even if climate change wasn't a factor at all, we have to start that transition right now to these technologies because we don't want to get stuck, right? Sitting there, Lance, and all of a sudden and say, gee, we're out of oil all of a sudden, right? No more oil. We're done. And we didn't do anything to prepare. That's the type of event that crushes the world economy and crushes society because we weren't ready. We didn't have anything in place. And now that we've lost access to something that we basically completely rely on for all facets of life, now we're just out of luck, right? Because we didn't do anything.
And if you come from one of those poor regions or your family did like mine, where there were the history of coal mining, nobody works harder than coal miners. But is it really doing us anything to continue to subsidize that and keep those people in a job that eventually they're going to lose?
Pay to retrain them.
The fact that it's dirty and everything else. Right. If we invest in the infrastructure, which is what you were talking about, and we say we're going to put up solar panels and we're going to put up windmills and we're going to do this stuff, then they have a job where they can make more money and it's cleaner and it's healthier for them. And, I wouldn't know who wouldn't want that. Who wouldn't want a job that's going to pay more money? And, oh, wait a minute. The sidebar is not only does it help people and does it give them a job and make them healthier and help our country and help the economy, it also might save the planet and solve us down the road. So it just takes a little bit of flipping your thinking. It's not that you don't have to throw everything out. You just flip it a little bit. And nobody wants these workers that are going to be out of a job to be out of a job. We're not after people's job. Let's give them a new job to work that's going to benefit. And they probably feel a whole lot better about it, right? I mean, none of us want to go to work where we think we're not doing something that's valuable to everybody. And it's not that coal miners are very valuable because we need it for electricity. We need it for all these. But if we took that same money and that same effort and their same dedication to their job and put it towards installing solar panels or building windmills or coming up with, building electric vehicles, then all of a sudden they could have that same pride they have as being coal miners in those industries, and it would serve the purpose of helping out the planet and making society a cleaner, healthier place to live and breathe and eat. That's
why I'm glad we got to talk about it today, Lance, because I think hopefully for people it's that frame the mindset of, regardless of how you approach this, right? If it's from a humanitarian, let's protect the world, keep the environment clean. Great. You can come at it from that angle, right? If you come at it from the, I'm not really concerned about that, but I am concerned about my pocketbook. Well, this is a reason that you got to be concerned. Because again, especially if you're my age, 10 years older than me, 10 years younger than me, it is going to affect us. It is already doing so. It's only going to increase its effect on our economy. So if we start doing stuff now, that's how we start making that difference. And I tell you, Lance, just leave people with this, right? I can tell you, I was just having a conversation with my aunt the other day. They have a hybrid vehicle, and I was talking about our electric car. And I said, one of the interesting things is how much more aware you become of your vehicle's efficiency, how you're driving, the things that contribute to energy consumption. And it's just again, whether you're driving an electric car because, you like that it costs less than a fuel-based vehicle, from a transportation standpoint, or whether you drive it for the climate or for both, in either situation, it just happens. It's just this weird transformation where you're watching that supply of energy, right? And you're becoming more aware. And then it leads to all these other things in life. And I think that's what something like a carbon tax, Lance, and again, maybe it's not that specifically, something like that has the opportunity to make us all a little bit more aware of what we're doing and how it impacts those around us, right? Our environment. And when we impact people around us, we also are, in effect, impacting ourselves. And I think that's what this is all about. No matter which angle you approach it from, they're valid angles to approach this problem. The reality is they all call for similar solutions. And that's why we have to recognize that and start moving toward it and start demanding that our lawmakers take it seriously so that we can keep those good American jobs here. We can make sure the economy doesn't suffer unfairly, and we can have a cleaner, healthier world in the process. Wins for everybody, hopefully.
Another 30 or 35 minutes has gone by and we've followed the mission statement again. Isn't that great? I mean, we're going to get, pats on the back by the bosses because, if you haven't heard it before, we here at True Chat, which is the company that we do this show who employ us, they have a mission statement. And that mission statement is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've had that today. Justin and I have outlined many different variables in this discussion of the cost of fossil fuels and its effect on a whole variety of issues. It's not just going after these dirty energy producing people and let's do clean energy and let's save the planet and hug a tree. That's not what we've done at all. We've had this conversation and talked about how it affects those people, those workers, and all of us around the world and in the United States. And so if you like this conversation and it got you to thinking, please share it with your friends and your family members and get them involved too, because the more people we have having these kinds of conversations, the more good things we can do for the world. And if they say, well, where do you find these guys? It sounds like it's kind of interesting. You can send them to Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is released as a podcast Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. in the Eastern Time Zone. We're also a syndicated radio program, so be sure to check your local talk station, see if they carry The State of Us. If they don't, call them up, tell them they should. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our editing producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.